Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply living well. But when that life includes the power to destroy the very people who once destroyed you, the temptation becomes almost unbearable. The rain was drumming against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office when my assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Chambers, there's a Richard Davenport here to see you. He says it's urgent and concerns a potential partnership with Vanguard Health." I didn't look up from my computer screen immediately. The name hit me like a physical blow, but I'd learned long ago to control my reactions. 15 years of climbing, from rock bottom to the executive suite of one of America's largest healthcare corporations, had taught me that much. When I finally raised my eyes, my voice was steady. "Send him in." But let me take you back to where this all began. Because the woman sitting in that executive chair wasn't the same girl who once stood shivering in the rain outside a mansion in Connecticut. The argument had been building for weeks. At 18, I thought I was ready for anything life could throw at me. I was wrong. Standing in our family's pristine living room, with its imported marble floors and crystal chandeliers, I faced my father, Richard Davenport, across what felt like a chasm wider than the Atlantic. "You're going to ruin everything we've built." His voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings as he slammed a stack of college applications onto the mahogany coffee table. Yale, Princeton, Harvard. All the dreams he'd had for me scattered like leaves. All of this because of some worthless boy. My mother, Eleanor, stood beside him, her face pale as the expensive pearls around her neck. She hadn't said a word since I'd told them, but her silence spoke volumes. In the corner, my cousin Chloe sat curled on the leather sofa, trying to hide her smirk behind a magazine. She was loving every minute of this. "I'm pregnant," I said again, my voice calmer than I felt. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Richard's laugh was cold, bitter. "Pregnant? Don't tell me you've managed to taint the Davenport bloodline with some construction worker or gas station attendant. This family has built its reputation over 2 centuries, not to have it destroyed by one foolish girl." Eleanor finally found her voice, reaching for my arm with trembling fingers. "Ava, sweetheart, please tell me this is all a mistake. Apologize to your father. Tell him you'll take care of this situation. Don't destroy our family's future." Her words cut deeper than my father's rage because they revealed what mattered most to her. Appearances, not her daughter. "Look at Chloe." Richard gestured wildly toward my cousin, who was now openly enjoying the spectacle. "She's preparing for Harvard. And you? You're preparing for diapers." I refused to tell them who the father was. How could I explain that it was James, the son of our housekeeper, who was working 3 jobs to put himself through community college? How could I make them understand that I loved him, and he loved me, despite the vast difference in our social status? They would never accept it, never understand that love doesn't recognize bank accounts or family names. "Get out of my house!" Richard's face was red with fury. "If you want to live like a failure, then do it on your own." What happened next wasn't a quiet departure. Richard grabbed my worn duffel bag from where I'd left it by the stairs, dragged me to the front door, and hurled the bag onto the rain-soaked lawn. My mother didn't just stand by and watch. She was the one who slammed the door in my face. The sound of that door closing was the last thing I heard from my family for 15 years. The first night, I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot, my hands protectively covering my still flat stomach. The second night, I found myself in a homeless shelter, surrounded by women whose stories made mine seem trivial. I wasn't just starting from zero. I was starting from negative numbers. I found work at a late-night diner called Mel's, where the coffee was bitter, the customers were often drunk, and the pay was barely enough to rent a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. The smell of industrial detergent became the soundtrack to my pregnancy, mixing with the morning sickness that seemed to last all day. Everything changed the night I collapsed outside Dr. Marcus Vance's private clinic. I'd been walking home from my shift when the exhaustion finally overwhelmed me. When I came to, I was looking up at a man with kind eyes and graying temples who was checking my pulse. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" he asked, helping me sit up. "Instead of just giving me money or calling an ambulance, doctor." Vance offered me something I hadn't expected. A chance. "My filing system is a disaster," he said. "I'll pay you $50 to organize it tonight." I didn't just organize his files. I created a color-coded system that made everything searchable and cross-referenced. When Dr. Adolph Vance saw what I'd accomplished. He offered me a job as his office manager. It wasn't charity. It was recognition of potential. 3 months later, Leo was born. I named him after Leonardo da Vinci, hoping he would grow up to be a man who saw possibilities where others saw only problems. Dr. Vance gave me time off, but I was back within 2 weeks, Leo sleeping in a bassinet beside my desk, while I learned everything I could about medical administration. During Leo's naps and after his bedtime, I took online courses in business administration, healthcare management, and data analysis. I didn't just study, I applied everything I learned immediately. When I noticed inefficiencies in the clinic's billing system, I created new protocols that saved thousands of dollars each month. When insurance claims were getting denied at unusual rates, I developed a tracking system that identified the problems and improved our approval rate by 30%. Dr. Vance's sister, Isabella Vance, was a senior executive at Vanguard Health, one of the largest healthcare corporations in the country. She was nothing like her compassionate brother. Isabella was steel-wrapped in expensive suits, a woman who had clawed her way to the top in a male-dominated industry and had no patience for sob stories. "My brother has a soft heart," she told me during our first meeting. "I don't. Here, only results matter." Isabella threw every difficult, tedious task at me she could think of. I automated data entry processes, wrote simple code to analyze patient flow patterns, and created efficiency reports that helped streamline operations across multiple departments. I didn't just meet her expectations, I exceeded them so consistently that she had no choice but to take notice. But success breeds its own problems. Chloe, through her family connections, landed an internship at Vanguard Health around the same time I was being promoted to department supervisor. Seeing me rise while she struggled with basic tasks ignited a jealousy that burned bright and dangerous. She started spreading rumors that I was sleeping my way to the top, that I was a gold-digging single mother who used my son to gain sympathy. The whispers followed me through the corridors, but I'd learned something important during my years of struggle. Results speak louder than gossip. The confrontation came during a major presentation I was scheduled to give to the board about cost-saving measures across our hospital network. The night before, Chloe deliberately deleted the crucial data file from the shared server. She thought she'd destroyed months of work and my reputation in one stroke. But I'd learned to expect the worst from people and prepare accordingly. I had backup files stored in 3 different cloud services, and I'd memorized the key statistics. During the presentation, I not only delivered my findings flawlessly, but also demonstrated how I'd traced the deletion back to Chloe's computer terminal. The security footage of her accessing the system after hours was particularly damning. Chloe was terminated that day. I wasn't vindictive about it. I was professional. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being better at your job than your enemies expect. Over the next 10 years, I climbed steadily through Vanguard Health's ranks, manager to director to vice president to senior vice president. Each promotion came with greater responsibility, higher stakes, and more recognition. Forbes featured me in their 40 under 40 list. Harvard Business Review published my article on healthcare efficiency. The girl who'd once slept in homeless shelters was now making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of patients. Leo grew up surrounded by my ambition, but never neglected because of it. He was brilliant, curious, and kind in ways that reminded me daily why I'd fought so hard to build this life. At 15, he was already accepted into advanced robotics programs and spoke 3 languages fluently. He was everything I'd hoped for and more than I'd dared to dream. The house I'd built for us overlooked a pristine lake in one of Connecticut's most exclusive neighborhoods. It was all glass and steel, modern architecture that spoke of success earned rather than inherited. It was also, not coincidentally, less than 20 miles from the Davenport estate where I'd grown up. When the economic downturn hit, it took down several old-money families who'd relied on outdated business models and poor financial decisions. The Davenport investment group was hemorrhaging money, and Richard was desperate for a partnership that could save the company he'd inherited from his father. That's when he learned about the powerful new senior vice president at Vanguard Health, a woman named Ava Chambers, who was known for her ruthless efficiency and her ability to make or break healthcare partnerships. He had no idea he was researching his own daughter until he saw my photograph in that Forbes article. The desperation in his voice when he called my office was almost pathetic. He wanted a meeting to discuss mutually beneficial business opportunities. He had no idea that I'd already reviewed his company's proposal and marked it for rejection weeks earlier. Now, 15 years after that rainy night when he'd thrown me out of his house, Richard Davenport sat across from me in my living room. He'd aged badly. Stress and poor decisions had carved deep lines in his face and turned his hair completely gray. Eleanor sat beside him, her hands trembling as she accepted the coffee I'd personally prepared for them. Leo bounded down the stairs, talking animatedly about the robotics competition his team had just won. He was polite to my unexpected guests, shaking hands and making small talk with the social grace I'd taught him. They had no idea they were looking at their grandson. "We made mistakes, Ava," Richard began, his voice lacking its old authority. "We were wrong to react the way we did. But family is family, and we've heard about your position at Vanguard. Perhaps we could discuss." He paused, clearly struggling with the words. "Perhaps you could help arrange a meeting, We're interested in partnership opportunities. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. A meeting? The silence stretched between us like a wire under tension. Richard, I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned to wield over boardrooms full of men just like him. Your company's partnership proposal was on my desk last week. His eyes widened with hope. And I was the one who stamped "rejected" on it. The color drained from his face. Eleanor gasped audibly. Vanguard Health doesn't partner with failing companies run by people with demonstrably poor judgment. It's an unacceptable business risk. Richard looked like he might collapse. For the first time in his life, his arrogance crumbled completely. Eleanor began to cry, her sobs echoing in my pristine living room. Ava, please. He's your father. He was my biological father, I replied, my voice steady and calm. But he forfeited the right to be my father the night he threw me out into the rain. I forgave you both long ago, not for your sake, but for mine. So I could move forward without carrying the weight of hatred. I stood, walking to the window that overlooked the lake. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Your business problems are your business problems. I won't use my position to save someone who discarded me when I had nothing. But then I looked at Leo, who had witnessed this entire exchange in silence. He deserved the chance to know his grandparents, if they were truly willing to change. However, I continued, turning back to face them, Leo deserves to have grandparents, if you genuinely want to be part of his life. This door will never open for Richard and Eleanor Davenport, the society couple who value reputation over family. But it might open for a grandfather and grandmother who are willing to put aside their pride and build a relationship with their grandson from scratch. I walked them to the door, my heels clicking on the marble floors with the same authority I commanded in corporate boardrooms. If you're willing to do that, if you can come here not as the Davenports of Connecticut high society, but simply as people who want to know their grandson, then call me. The choice is yours. I closed the door gently this time. No slamming, no drama. Through the window, I watched them stand on my front steps, looking lost and smaller than I'd ever seen them. Leo found me in the kitchen a few minutes later. Mom, he said, his voice full of something I couldn't quite identify. I'm proud of you. I pulled my son into a hug, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and the lingering smell of the electronics lab where he spent his afternoons. Our legacy isn't built on money or status, Leo. Our legacy is built from ashes, and it's stronger than anything they ever had. 6 months later, Eleanor called. Not Richard, he was apparently still too proud to make the first move. But Eleanor asked, tentatively, if she could take Leo to lunch. No agenda, no mention of business. Just a grandmother wanting to know her grandson. I said yes. The house on the lake sits quietly now in the evening light, filled with the sounds of Leo practicing violin and the soft hum of the dishwasher running its cycle. Tomorrow, I'll go back to Vanguard Health, where I'm being considered for the position of Chief Executive Officer. The board meets next month, and the consensus is that I'm the frontrunner. Sometimes I think about that 18-year-old girl who slept in her car with her hand on her belly, terrified and alone. I want to tell her that the pain she's feeling will transform into something powerful, that the family who rejected her will someday sit in her living room begging for her help. I want to tell her that she'll build something better than anything she lost. But mostly, I want to tell her that the baby she's carrying will grow up to be proud of her, and that will be worth more than any revenge she could ever imagine. The rain has stopped, and through my office window, I can see the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. My phone buzzes with a text from Leo. Robotics team made it to nationals. Coming home to celebrate? I smile and pack up my briefcase. Some legacies are measured in quarterly reports and stock prices. Others are measured in the quality of the life you build after everything falls apart. I know which one matters more. The Davenport name still appears in the Connecticut Society pages occasionally, usually in connection with charity events or historical preservation societies. Richard never did call me directly. Pride, apparently, was a harder habit to break than I'd anticipated. But Eleanor has become a fixture in Leo's life, attending his robotics competitions and piano recitals with the enthusiasm of a woman making up for lost time. She never mentions the business, never asks about my work at Vanguard. She's learned, perhaps too late but not too never, what truly matters. Last week, she brought Leo a photo album filled with pictures of me as a child, stories I'd never heard about my own childhood, memories she'd saved for 15 years without knowing if she'd ever have the chance to share them. Your mother was brilliant even then, she told Leo, pointing to a picture of me at his age, bent over a chemistry set in our old garage. She always found solutions where the rest of us only saw problems. I found them looking through the album together when I came home from work, Leo's head on his grandmother's shoulder as she explained who various relatives were. It was a peace I hadn't dared to hope for, built not on apologies or grand gestures, but on the simple decision to value what was real over what looked impressive to others. The CEO announcement came 3 weeks later. Vanguard Health's board voted unanimously to promote me to Chief Executive Officer, making me the youngest CEO in the company's history, and one of the few women to lead a Fortune 500 healthcare corporation. The press release mentioned my innovative approaches to healthcare delivery, and my track record of improving both patient outcomes and organizational efficiency. It didn't mention that I'd once been homeless, or that I'd built my career while raising a son as a single mother, or that I'd learned resilience in the hardest possible way. Those weren't the kinds of details that appeared in business publications, but they were the foundation everything else was built on. Leo turned 16 the week I started my new role. For his birthday, we took a trip to Italy, visiting the museums and workshops where Leonardo da Vinci had created his masterpieces. Standing in the Uffizi Gallery, looking at drawings that were both scientifically precise and beautifully artistic, I thought about the different kinds of legacies people leave behind. Some people inherit their power and spend their lives trying not to lose it. Others have to build it from nothing, and in the process, they learn things about themselves and about the world that can't be taught in business schools or passed down through trust funds. As we walked through Florence's ancient streets, Leo took pictures with the digital camera he'd built himself, and I realized that the best revenge really is living well. Not because it proves anything to the people who wronged you, but because it proves something to yourself about what's possible when you refuse to let other people's limitations become your own. The girl who was thrown out into the rain with nothing but a duffel bag and a pregnancy test had become a woman who could chart the course for a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But more importantly, she'd raised a son who was kind, brilliant, and confident in ways she'd never been allowed to be at his age. That night, in our hotel room overlooking the Arno River, Leo showed me the college applications he'd been working on. MIT, Stanford, Caltech. All the schools where young people go to learn how to change the world. I want to study biomedical engineering, he told me. I want to design prosthetics that can be controlled by thought, help people who've lost limbs feel whole again. I looked at my son, this remarkable young man who'd inherited my determination but coupled it with a compassion I was still learning to trust, and I understood something I'd never quite grasped before. The real legacy wasn't the company I'd built or the position I'd achieved or even the money I'd accumulated. The real legacy was sitting across from me, dreaming of ways to help other people who'd been broken by circumstances beyond their control. Sometimes when I'm working late in my corner office, I think about that moment when Richard and Eleanor sat in my living room, and I held their future in my hands the same way they'd once held mine. I could have destroyed them completely. I had the power, the connections, and certainly the justification. But I chose something different. I chose to offer them a path forward that required them to become better people, not just to benefit from their relationship to me. It wasn't mercy, exactly, and it wasn't revenge. It was something more complex and ultimately more satisfying. It was justice tempered with the possibility of redemption. They had to earn their way back into my life, and more importantly, into Leo's life. There were no shortcuts, no trading on old family connections or shared memories. They had to prove, through consistent actions over time, that they'd learned to value people over appearances, substance over status. Eleanor passed that test. Richard, as far as I know, is still trying to figure out how to take it. The rain has started again outside my office windows, and I can see my reflection in the darkened glass. Older now, more confident, wearing a suit that costs more than I used to make in 6 months. But the eyes are the same ones that stared back at me from the bathroom mirror of that studio apartment above the laundromat all those years ago. Determined, perhaps a little wary, but undefeated. Tomorrow, I'll have breakfast with Leo before he leaves for his robotics internship at MIT's Artificial Intelligence Lab. We'll talk about his projects, his friends, his dreams for the future. He'll probably ask me about my day, and I'll tell him about the new hospitals we're planning to build, the research initiatives we're funding, the ways we're trying to make healthcare more accessible to people who need it most. What I won't tell him, because he already knows it in the way that children understand things that adults complicate, is that every decision I make, every risk I take, every success I achieve is motivated by the memory of what it felt like to have nothing and no one. Every patient who gets better care because of policies I implement, every employee who advances because of programs I create, every innovation we fund that helps people heal, it all traces back to that night when I learned that sometimes you have to save yourself before you can save anyone else. The legacy of ashes isn't just about rising from destruction. It's about using the heat of that fire to forge something stronger, something that can withstand whatever storms come next. It's about teaching your children that they don't have to inherit other people's limitations, that they can choose to build rather than simply preserve, to include rather than exclude, to lift others up rather than push them down. Leo will leave for college in 2 years. He'll study biomedical engineering and probably change the world in ways I can't even imagine yet. He'll marry someone who sees his worth the way James saw mine, someone who values the content of his character over the size of his trust fund. He'll raise children who will never know what it feels like to be thrown away by the people who are supposed to love them unconditionally. And maybe, if I'm very fortunate, he'll sometimes tell them stories about his mother, who started with nothing and built everything, not for revenge, but for love. Not to prove she was worthy, but to create a world where other children never have to prove their worth to people who should already know it. That would be a legacy worth leaving. That would be something more valuable than any inheritance, more lasting than any fortune, more powerful than any revenge. The rain continues to fall against the windows of my corner office, but it doesn't sound threatening anymore. It sounds like possibility, like renewal, like the promise that tomorrow will be different from yesterday, because we have the power to make it so. And in the end, that might be the most important lesson of all, that we are not victims of our circumstances, but architects of our own redemption. The storm doesn't define us. How we rebuild afterward does.